bound to a chair, her wrists chafed raw by coarse rope. Thorn appeared in the doorway, his face illuminated by the flickering bulb, a cruel, triumphant sneer marring his features. "Well, well, little bird," he purred, his voice oozing with satisfaction. "Looks like your gilded cage wasn't so secure after all. Your Mafia prince failed you, didn't he? All that talk of protection. Empty words." Alara glared at him, defiance warring with the cold tendrils of fear. "He will come for me," she spat, her voice raspy. Thorn merely laughed, a grating, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I'm sure he'll try. But by then, it'll be too late. You see, the collector and I have a proposition. You will authenticate a very special piece for us, a master forgery that will destabilize the entire art market. And in return, your dear sister, she might just get to keep her life." He leaned in, his breath sour. "But first, you'll watch as we dismantle everything Rossi holds dear. Starting with you." The despair was a suffocating weight. Dom had betrayed her, hadn't he? Let her be taken. Used her as bait. The bitter words she had flung at him in his study, "You're no different from Thorn," echoed in her mind, a crushing confirmation of her ultimate vulnerability. He had promised safety, but delivered only a more elaborate trap. The pain of that perceived betrayal was almost as crippling as the physical fear. She was just another piece in his dangerous game, and she had lost. Hours bled into an eternity. Alara huddled in the cold, her body aching, her spirit teetering on the edge of oblivion. She imagined Lily, safe, oblivious, and a fresh wave of agony washed over her. She had failed her sister, but somewhere in the heart of the city, Dom was a force unleashed. His fury was a tangible entity, ripping through the meticulously built facades of the underworld. Marco, a shadow at his side, fed him intelligence, each fragmented piece of breadcrumb leading through the dark. Interrogations were swift, brutal, yielding answers with terrifying efficiency. A minor pawn in Thorn's network, broken by Dom's sheer intensity, finally cracked, revealing the location, an abandoned industrial complex by the Forgotten Docks, a place where art and illicit trade often converged. "Prep the team," Dom commanded, his voice a low growl, his eyes like chips of volcanic glass. He had changed into tactical gear, sleek and dark, a firearm holstered at his hip. The blood on his shirt had been roughly bandaged, but the pain was a distant hum, drowned out by the roar of his rage. No witnesses. No mercy. "And I lead." Marco nodded, his face grim. "It's a suicide mission, boss. Heavily fortified. Thorn and the Collector are expecting you." "Good." Dom snarled, his lips peeling back in a feral grin. "Let them expect." "They won't be expecting this." The industrial complex loomed out of the swirling fog off the river, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky. The air reeked of brine, rust, and something metallic that tasted like fear. Dom moved like a ghost, leading his elite team, each man a reflection of his own ruthless efficiency. The complex was a maze of rusted machinery, decaying warehouses, and flickering halogen lights. Gunfire erupted, sharp and sudden, as Dom's men engaged Thorn's perimeter guards. Dom, however, bypassed the main assault. He knew Thorn, knew he would have a personal lair, a secure chamber where he held his most prized possessions. And Alara was his most prized possession. He moved with a primal, terrifying instinct, driven by an obsession that eclipsed all else. His ears, honed by years in the shadows, picked up the faint, distant echo of a woman's cry. Alara. He found her in a large, grimy storage area, tucked away behind stacks of crates. The flickering bulb cast a sickly yellow glow on her pale face, her eyes wide with terror as Thorn, a smirk on his face, brandished a crude, rusty knife, tracing its tip along the delicate curve of her jaw. The Collector, a towering, menacing figure, stood guard, his gaze cold and watchful. "Looks like your prince is late, little bird," Thorn sneered, pressing the blade just enough to draw a thin bead of blood. "Such a shame." Alara flinched, a whimper escaping her lips. Despair, absolute and crushing, threatened to overwhelm her. This was it. This was the end. Just as Thorn raised the knife higher, ready to make his point, the heavy steel door to the storage area exploded inward with a deafening crash. Splintered metal and concrete dust filled the air. Dom stood framed in the wreckage, a dark, avenging angel, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying fire that seemed to scorch the very air. He held a silenced pistol, its barrel still smoking. Adrenaline surged through Alara's veins, a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock. Dom. He had come. Thorn recoiled, his face blanching, the knife clattering to the floor. Rossi. Dom didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a declaration, a promise of absolute, devastating retribution. His gaze, lethal and unwavering, locked onto Alaris. In that instant, she saw it. Not just a protector, not just a mafia boss, but a man driven by a raw, consuming possessiveness, a fierce, undeniable love that transcended all logic, all danger. His eyes held a terrifying devotion, a silent vow to destroy anyone who dared to touch what was his. The collector, quick and agile, moved first, lunging at Dom, a wicked blade flashing in his hand. Dom didn't flinch. He moved with a brutal, almost inhuman speed, deflecting the blow, his pistol barking once, twice. The collector grunted, stumbling back, clutching his arm, blood blooming on his dark tactical suit. He was formidable, but Dom, fueled by a rage born of despair and love, was unstoppable. Thorn, pale and trembling, lunged for Alara, trying to use her as a shield. But Dom was faster. He moved with the precision of a predator, a blur of dark motion. He slammed into Thorn, a vicious, bone-jarring blow that sent the man sprawling. Thorn cried out, clutching his ribs, his face contorted in agony. Dom stood over Thorn, his pistol aimed steadily at the man's head. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down Alara's spine. You dared to touch what is mine. You dared to threaten her. You dared to betray me. Each word was a hammer blow, laced with an escalating fury. There is no hell deep enough for what you deserve. Alara, still bound to the chair, watched in terrified awe. This was the true Dom. The ruthless, brutal, utterly dangerous man she had glimpsed only in shadows. But for her. All for her. And in that terrifying, exhilarating moment, the perceived betrayal dissolved, replaced by a fierce, undeniable love that mirrored his own dark devotion. He was not just saving her, he was reclaiming her. Suddenly, the collector, despite his wound, lunged again, a desperate final attack, aiming a kick at Dom's head. Dom reacted with lightning speed, turning, deflecting, and unleashing a flurry of brutal, precise strikes that sent the larger man crashing through a stack of wooden crates. The collector lay motionless, buried under splintered wood. As she stepped out of Viridian's grand, imposing doors into the cold, unforgiving city night, the stark reality of her existence pressed down, heavy and suffocating. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows, and the wind, sharp with the promise of winter, seemed to whisper Thorn's subtle threats in her ear. She was completely alone, utterly exposed, and every path she saw ahead was shrouded in an impenetrable darkness, stretching endlessly before her. Unbeknownst to her, however, the glint of obsidian eyes was already upon her, a silent, predatory gaze that had begun to watch her every step, waiting for the perfect moment to claim her. The air in the private viewing room was thick with a hushed anticipation of wealth, an almost palpable scent of old money, expensive perfume, and the faint, sweet perfume of anticipation. Alara, dressed in a simple, dark uniform Thorn insisted upon for all staff during these exclusive previews, felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine despite the perfectly climate-controlled environment. Her hands, freshly washed and free of chemical residue, trembled with a barely perceptible tremor as she performed the final ceremonial polish on a Tang Dynasty vase. It was exquisite, even as a forgery. The glaze, a vibrant celadone green, shimmered under the carefully positioned spotlights, reflecting the subtle undulations of the hand-thrown clay. The delicate etched dragons seemed to writhe with ancient life, their scales catching the light like tiny emeralds. Alara knew every curve, every minute detail, because she had spent countless hours ensuring its deceptive perfection. It was a lie, a beautiful, devastating lie, and it felt like a heavy stone in her stomach. Today's buyer was a legend whispered in the hushed, gilded corridors of Viridian, Dante Moretti. The Shadow King, Thorn had called him, his voice laced with an unusual blend of respect and fear. A man who collects not just art, but secrets. Do not displease him, Hilara. The warning had been stark, the implication heavy. Dante Moretti didn't just buy art. He acquired it, much like he acquired influence, power, and if rumors were to be believed, souls. Her exhaustion, a constant companion, sharpened her nerves. The endless nights, the pressure of Thorn's threats, Lily's fading smile in her mind's eye, it all culminated in a momentary lapse. As her polishing cloth, soft as a cloud, swept over a particularly intricate dragon scale, her finger, calloused from years of delicate work, snagged on a microscopic ridge. A tiny, almost inaudible click. Her breath hitched. She froze, her eyes, wide and horrified, fixated on the vase. There, near the dragon's chin, a sliver of glaze, no larger than a pinhead, had chipped. It was barely visible, a minuscule imperfection that most would never notice, even under scrutiny. But Hilara wasn't most people. Her entire life revolved around the pursuit of perfection, the meticulous restoration of beauty. And this was a mar, a fatal flaw and a perfect deception. Her stomach plummeted. Thorn would kill her. Worse, he would hurt Lily. A heavy silence descended upon the room, not for her accidental nick, but from the sudden shift in the air pressure. Presence. Potent. Dangerous. Dante Moretti entered, and the very atmosphere seemed to bend to accommodate him. He wasn't overtly flashy, no flamboyant suits or loud jewelry. Instead, he wore a charcoal gray suit, impeccably tailored, that moved with him like a second skin. Its fabric seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His dark hair, neatly combed back from a high forehead, gleamed faintly. But it was his eyes that held her captive, deep-set, the color of polished obsidian, sharp and intensely observant. They missed nothing. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace, his expensive leather shoes making almost no sound on the plush Persian rug. He was less a man, more a force of nature, contained and terrifying. Hilara's breath caught in her throat. She felt an instinctive urge to shrink back, to disappear into the shadows she had always preferred. But she was pinned, a moth under a powerful, unblinking lamp. Thorn, ever the oily sycophant, materialized instantly, his usual bluster replaced by a deferential crouch. Mr. Moretti, a true honor. The Tang vase, as you requested, prepared for your viewing pleasure. His voice was uncharacteristically smooth, almost fawning. Dante didn't acknowledge Thorn. His obsidian gaze swept over the room, assessing, calculating, dismissing. Then, with a chilling certainty, they landed on the vase. He approached it slowly, deliberately, his presence expanding to fill the space. Hilara felt a prickle of dread crawl up her arms. He wouldn't miss it. He couldn't. He reached out, his long, elegant fingers encased in pristine white gloves. He didn't touch the vase immediately, instead circling it with the intensity of a predator studying its prey. He leaned in, his dark head tilted, his eyes tracing the edged dragons, the delicate curves, the subtle sheen of the celadone glaze. Hilara held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She could hear the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the overhead lights, the frantic whispers of her own panicked thoughts. He sees it. He sees it. Oh God, he sees it. His gloved finger paused, not directly on the nick, but tantalizingly close, as if a magnetic force drew him. He moved it millimeters at a time, then pressed gently. The chip, so tiny, seemed to leap out under the sudden focus. Hilara's stomach twisted into a cold knot. This was it. Then, Lily's fate, her own career, all crumbling because of one stupid, clumsy slip. Dante's head lifted. His eyes, dark as midnight, locked onto Alaris. There was no anger, no accusation, no shock, only a profound, unnerving recognition. It was as if he had peeled back her skin, gazed into the raw, aching core of her desperation, and simply understood. She felt utterly exposed, laid bare beneath his unwavering stare. It was terrifying, yes, but also strangely compelling. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, someone had truly seen her, beyond the facade, beyond the polished exterior she painstakingly maintained. And that recognition from such a dangerous man sent a shiver, half dread, half something else entirely, down her spine. Thorn, oblivious to the silent, charged exchange, cleared his throat. A magnificent piece, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Moretti? Its provenance is impeccable, its artistry unmatched. Dante finally tore his gaze from Alara, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes before they settled on Thorn, now cold and utterly devoid of warmth. Indeed, he said, his voice the low, resonant baritone that sent a tremor through the floorboards. Impeccable. The word hung in the air, a silent judgment that only Alara seemed to truly comprehend. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, Dante raised his hand, signaling to his own assistant. I'll take it. And I'll double the asking price. A stunned silence filled the room. Thorn's jaw dropped, his usually smug face a mask of bewildered greed. Double the asking price. It was an exorbitant sum, an amount so ludicrous it defied logic, especially for a piece he knew, or should have known, had a flaw. It was a blatant, unapologetic display of raw, unchallenged power, a silent declaration that money was no object, that what he desired, he simply took on his own terms. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. She was shaken, profoundly so, not just by his wealth or his power, but by the way his eyes had found hers, acknowledging her secret. He knew. He had seen the chip, and he had chosen not to expose it, but to claim the vase anyway, almost as if he were claiming the very imperfection she had created. It was an act of dominance, of possession, so subtle yet so absolute, that it left her breathless. The weight of being seen by Dante Moretti felt like a brand, etched deep into her soul, promising a fate she couldn't yet comprehend, but knew with a terrifying certainty she could not escape. The air crackled with a new, dangerous electricity. Her life, she realized, had just irrevocably changed. The summons arrived on Alara's desk at precisely 9 a.m., nestled conspicuously atop a stack of pending conservation reports. It wasn't a formal memo, nor an email. It was a single heavy card, the kind reserved for invitations to exclusive galas or private viewings. But this one bore only 2 words in a stark, elegant script, Thorn. Now, the weight of it in her hand felt like a lead sinker. Her heart, already a jittery hummingbird in her chest, began to pound a furious rhythm. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what this meant. Mr. Sterling Thorne's office was a meticulously curated tableau of power and expensive taste. Mahogany gleamed, unblemished by dust. The scent of aged leather and Thorne's bespoke cologne, crisp and faintly citrusy, hung in the air, a constant reminder of his elevated status. Alara felt it press down on her, the invisible weight of his authority, the suffocating atmosphere of a place where secrets were kept under lock and key, and moral boundaries were fluid, shifting with the tides of profit. Thorne sat behind his colossal antique desk, bathed in the soft, filtered light from the tall windows overlooking the city. He didn't look up immediately as she entered, instead meticulously straightening a pile of documents, his movements precise, almost surgical. The silence stretched, taut and oppressive, making the distant murmur of city traffic feel like a distant, irrelevant hum. Alara clasped her hands, nails digging into her palms, a desperate anchor against the rising tide of panic. Finally, he looked up, a thin, almost invisible smile playing on his lips. Alara, come in. Do close the door, please. The click of the latch echoed in the vast room, sealing her fate, or so it felt. She moved to the chair opposite his desk, its plush velvet inviting yet insidious. She remained standing, a small act of defiance in a world where she felt utterly powerless. Thorne's smile widened slightly, an amused glint in his cold eyes. Such admirable loyalty, Alara. Always so dedicated. Which brings me to our next little endeavor. He gestured to a large, rolled tapestry propped against the wall. It was a medieval piece, faded and magnificent, depicting a hunting scene with knights and mythical beasts. Genuine, priceless, and now apparently tainted. A rather exquisite example of 14th century Flemish artistry. Wouldn't you agree? Thorne purred, his voice a low, insidious rumble. Or it will be, once you've given it your unique touch. He leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach. It appears a crucial section depicting a particularly rare heraldic crest has been a loss to time. Tragedy, but one I believe your extraordinary talents can rectify. A subtle enhancement, shall we say? Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Mr. Thorne, I cannot do that. This piece it's a national treasure. To alter it, to forge a section, would be an act of egregious fraud. It would destroy its historical integrity. Her voice, usually soft, was laced with a desperate plea. Thorne chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that grated on her nerves. Integrity, Alara, is a luxury few can afford, especially those burdened by rather substantial medical expenses. His gaze sharpened, turning predatory. Your sister, Lily. Dr. Peterson called this morning. It seems her latest treatment is rather costly. And your last payment for the Viridian account, well, it seems to be taking its sweet time to process, doesn't it? The words were a direct hit, an invisible fist to her gut. He knew. He always knew. He monitored her finances, Lily's health, with a terrifying, meticulous efficiency. Her knees threatened to buckle. You can't. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? Thorne's eyes glinted, devoid of compassion. I assure you, my dear, when I say a payment might be delayed, I mean it. And unforeseen complications can arise in hospitals, Simple administrative errors, a lost file, a misread chart. Very unfortunate, but these things happen when one is distracted by other matters. He paused, letting the unspoken threat hang heavy in the air. However, if our beautiful tapestry were to receive its historically accurate enhancement by the end of the week, I'm sure everything will proceed quite smoothly. Lily's bills, your excellent reputation, all secure. Alara's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold. The thought of Lily, fragile and vulnerable, becoming a pawn in Thorne's twisted games was a torment far worse than any threat to herself. She imagined a lost file, a forgotten medication, the subtle shift in care that could cost Lily precious time, precious life. The air in the room felt thin, suffocating. She felt utterly, completely trapped. What do you want me to do? She whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth, her defiance crumbling to dust. Excellent, Thorne said, his smile returning, a triumph. I knew you'd be reasonable. I'll send the specifications. And remember, Alara, discretion. Always. She retreated from his office, the heavy door closing behind her like the lid of a coffin. The polished marble floors of the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, each step in agony. Her mind raced, a frantic whirl of fear and despair. She had to find a way out. Later that afternoon, holed up in her conservation studio, the falsified Ming plate still gleaming accusingly, Alara made a desperate decision. She pulled out her old, battered Rolodex, a relic from her student days, and found a name, Dr. Anya Sharma. Anya had been her mentor at the Institute of Fine Arts, a woman of unimpeachable ethics and a fierce advocate for the purity of art history. If anyone could advise her, if anyone could offer a lifeline, it was Anya. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number, the old-fashioned rotary phone in the studio feeling strangely heavy in her hand. It rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. Dr. Sharma's office. Hello, Alara managed, her voice tight with nerves. This is Alara Vance. I used to be a student of Dr. Sharma's. Could I speak with her, please? It's urgent. A moment of silence. One moment. The hold music, a tinkling piano rendition of a forgotten classical piece, grated on her frayed nerves. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Anya's familiar voice, warm but cautious, came through. Alara. My dear, it's been so long. How are you? Anya, I need your advice. Alara blurted out, her carefully constructed composure threatening to shatter. It's about a piece of Viridian tapestry. Thorn is asking me to enhance it. It's a forgery, Anya, a deliberate fraud, and he's threatening me. A pause. A significant, heavy pause. Alara could almost hear Anya's mind working, processing the unspoken dangers. Alara, my dear, Anya said, her voice now softer, more guarded. Viridian. Mr. Thorn has quite the reputation. Certain circles, you understand, are best avoided, especially when one's reputation is so carefully built. But Anya, he's threatening Lily. He knows about her illness. He's holding her medical payments over my head. Alara's voice cracked, tears pricking at her eyes. She felt the familiar burn of shame, revealing her desperation. Alara, listen to me carefully. Anya's voice dropped to a near whisper, almost swallowed by the phone line. You need to be very, very careful. Some battles are not yours to fight alone. And some people, they have very long reach. You need to protect yourself, my dear. And your sister. Do not rock the boat unless you have an ironclad life raft. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to offer you one. The line went dead. Anya had hung up. Alara stared at the phone, its cold plastic casing suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was utterly alone. Anya, her ethical beacon, her last hope, had recoiled. The isolation was absolute, a crushing weight that left her breathless. The vast, anonymous city outside her window seemed to mock her, a million lives going on, oblivious to her quiet despair. That evening, as dusk bled into a bruised violet sky, Alara returned to her tiny apartment. The air, usually thick with the faint smell of dry-cleaning chemicals, held a new, unfamiliar scent, rich, earthy, floral. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she pushed open her door, her hand still clenching the flimsy flyer for Lily's latest expensive medication. On her rickety, chipped wooden table, where she usually ate lonely meals, sat a vase. Not just any vase. A crystal one, simple yet elegant, filled with black orchids. Their petals, a velvety, inky black, looked almost artificial in their perfection, impossibly striking against the drab backdrop of her apartment. They exuded a faint, heady perfume, exotic and unsettling. And next to the vase, nestled among the dark petals, was a small, velvet box. Her hands, still trembling from her encounter with Thorn, reached for it. Inside, resting on a bed of crimson satin, was an antique silver locket. It was exquisite, delicate, a piece she had admired from afar months ago of Viridian, a small, unremarkable item that had somehow caught her eye during an appraisal. She remembered pointing it out to Thorn, musing about its unique craftsmanship. It had been part of a smaller collection of Romanesque jewelry that Dante Moretti himself had acquired. Her breath hitched. A chilling realization swept over her, raising goosebumps on her arms despite the warmth of her cramped living room. He was watching her. Dante Moretti, the Shadow King. He hadn't just seen her in the viewing room. He had been observing her, following her, meticulously noting her small, personal preferences. The orchids, the locket, they weren't random gifts. They were a calculated, terrifying message. I know you. I see everything. A new phone number, unfamiliar and untraceable, appeared on her screen. No name, just a string of digits. Her finger hovered, a sudden primal fear making her heart lurch. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, who was. The silence stretched, broken only by the frantic beat of her own pulse. She answered. Alara Vance. The voice was low, resonant, dangerously calm. It was Dante Moretti. The sound of it, even through the tinny phone speaker, sent a shiver through her. I believe we have a mutual interest in the integrity of art and the welfare of certain delicate flowers. His words, veiled and suggestive, were a chilling confirmation. He wasn't just observing, he was actively involved. What do you want? She whispered, her voice barely audible. What I want, Ms. Vance, is to discuss a more permanent arrangement for your talents and for your sister's continued health. His tone left no room for negotiation. It wasn't an offer. It was a veiled demand. Viridian is a sinking ship, Alara, and you, my dear, are about to be pulled under with it. Unless, of course, you choose to step onto a different vessel. The silence that followed was deafening. Alara stared at the black orchids, their velvety darkness absorbing all the light, a stark symbol of the new dangerous world she was being pulled into. She had no choice. Lily's life hung in the balance. She had tried to fight alone, and she had failed. Now a devil cloaked in expensive suits and dangerous charisma was offering her a bargain. When do we meet? She finally asked, her voice trembling but firm, the forced acceptance a bitter taste on her tongue. Tomorrow, Dante's voice hummed, a predatory purr. At my residence. You'll be escorted. Do not be late, and bring nothing but your resolve. The line clicked dead. Alara stood there, the antique locket feeling heavy and cold in her palm, the black orchids exhaling their intoxicating, unsettling scent. She had just made a pact with the devil, traded one cage for another. But this new cage, she knew, would be far more opulent, far more dangerous, and utterly inescapable. Her life, as she knew it, was over. And a new, terrifying chapter, under the watchful, possessive gaze of the Shadow King, was about to begin. The black armored sedan glided through the city streets with an almost supernatural silence, its tinted windows offering Alara only fragmented glimpses of the world outside, the world she was leaving behind. Her meager belongings, packed into a single worn suitcase, were stowed in the trunk, a stark contrast to the opulent life she was about to enter. Fear was a cold, clenching fist in her stomach, twisting with a strange, dizzying sense of unreality. She was going to live with Dante Moretti, the Shadow King. The thought alone was enough to make her breath catch. The car ascended, winding its way up a private drive that snaked around a discreetly camouflaged hill, finally stopping before a colossal wrought iron gate. Beyond it, bathed in the soft glow of hidden spotlights, stood a penthouse that defied architectural conventions. It was less an apartment, more a fortress carved out of glass and steel, soaring above the city like a silent sentinel. Power, undeniable and absolute, emanated from its very structure. A man, built like a slab of granite, opened her door with an unnerving lack of sound. He offered no greeting, only a curt gesture towards the entrance. Alara stepped out, the cool evening air, crisp with the distant tang of the river, doing little to calm her nerves. The silence of the night was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the building's internal systems. This was it, the gilded cage. The interior was breathtaking in its minimalist grandeur. High ceilings, polished marble floors that reflected the city lights like scattered jewels, vast expanses of glass offering panoramic views. Yet, despite the undeniable luxury, it felt sterile, devoid of personal warmth. Until she saw him. Dante stood by the colossal window, a silhouette against the glittering tapestry of the city. He wore a dark silk robe that draped elegantly over his powerful frame, making him seem both relaxed and intensely dangerous. He turned, his obsidian eyes finding hers with an unnerving precision. Alara Vance, he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the silent space. Welcome to your new residence. It wasn't a question, but a statement of undeniable fact. Her initial apprehension was a tangible thing, a knot of ice in her chest. She mumbled a barely audible, "Thank you," feeling utterly out of place, a small, faded moth amidst a collection of rare, precious jewels. "Your sister, Lily?" Dante continued, completely ignoring her awkwardness, his gaze unwavering. "She has been moved to a private suite at St. Jude's." The finest medical team has been assembled. All expenses will be handled. You need not concern yourself with her care any longer." Ilara's breath hitched. She stared at him, stunned. "St. Jude's?" That was a hospital whispered about in hushed tones, reserved for the wealthiest, the most influential. Thorne's threats had evaporated, replaced by a wave of dizzying relief so potent it almost brought her to her knees. He had done it. Without fanfare, without a demand for gratitude, he had simply taken care of it. Her most agonizing burden lifted. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. Dante merely inclined his head, a subtle, dismissive gesture. "Gratitude is unnecessary. Efficiency is expected." He then gestured towards a discreet doorway. "Your studio has been prepared. State of the art. Everything you require for ethical conservation. No forgeries, Ilara. Only genuine art and genuine talent." He led her through a labyrinth of immaculate corridors to a sprawling studio. It was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. North-facing windows flooded the space with soft, even light. Custom-built easels, an array of the finest brushes and pigments she'd only read about in textbooks, a molecular imaging microscope, even a climate-controlled drying chamber. It was an artist's sanctuary, and it was all hers. The sharp, clean scent of new wood and fresh canvases filled the air, a stark contrast to the oppressive chemical tang of Viridian. This is incredible," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, touching a pristine workbench with a reverent hand. A tear, unbidden, escaped and traced a path down her cheek. Dante watched her, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes, a softening around the edges that was gone as quickly as it appeared. He made no move to comfort her, no platitude. He simply observed. And in that silent observation, she felt the strange, almost surreal sense of safety. The days that followed settled into an unusual rhythm. Ilara immersed herself in her new studio, restoring pieces from Dante's vast, astonishing collection. Ancient scrolls, Renaissance paintings, delicate ceramic artifacts. Each piece was a genuine treasure, demanding her full, uncompromised skill. The work was therapeutic, a balm to her scarred soul, allowing her to lose herself in the intricate dance of preservation. Her interactions with Dante were sparse, yet intensely charged. They shared silent meals in a dining room overlooking the shimmering expanse of the city, the only sounds the clink of silverware and the distant hum of metropolitan life. He ate with a quiet efficiency, his gaze often drifting to her, observing her without being intrusive. Ilara, initially guarded, found herself relaxing, slowly, cautiously, under his silent watch. One evening, during dinner, a delicate tremor ran through her hand as she reached for her water glass, a lingering symptom of her chronic anxiety. Dante, without a word, reached across the table and steadied the glass, his fingers briefly brushing hers. The contact was brief, fleeting, yet it sent a jolt, a spark of unexpected warmth through her. His skin was warm, firm, emanating a controlled power. He didn't linger, pulling his hand back almost immediately, but the subtle act of care, the unspoken acknowledgement of her vulnerability, spoke volumes. Another time, she found him late at night in the Grand Library, a cavernous room lined with books that smelled of leather and ancient wisdom. He was seated in a worn armchair, a rare, leather-bound volume open in his hands, the soft lamplight casting shadows across his sharp features. His expression was unguarded, a quiet intensity in his eyes as he absorbed the words on the page. He looked a human. Profoundly so. When he sensed her presence, his head snapped up, his expression instantly returning to its usual controlled mask. But Ilara had seen it, a glimpse of the man beneath the Shadow King, a hint of unexpected humanity that piqued her curiosity. He would sometimes leave notes for her, short, concise instructions about a particular artifact or a rare tool he had acquired for her studio. But occasionally, there would be something else, a delicate piece of artisanal chocolate left on her workbench, a specific blend of rare tea placed next to her kettle, items he couldn't possibly have known she liked, unless he was watching, always watching. These subtle acts of personalized care, devoid of any expectation, chipped away at her apprehension, replacing it with a growing, bewildering warmth. The underlying sexual tension, though unspoken, was a constant, shimmering undercurrent between them. It was in the way his gaze would linger on her for a fraction of a second too long, the almost imperceptible flare of his nostrils when she walked past, the quiet intensity that surrounded him whenever she was near. It was dangerous, exhilarating, and utterly forbidden. She found herself, slowly but surely, becoming accustomed to her gilded cage. It was a prison, yes, but one that offered her Lily's safety, her own peace of mind, and the opportunity to pursue her passion ethically. The fear was still there, a faint echo, but it was now overlaid with something new, a burgeoning curiosity about the man who held her fate in his dangerous hands. Who was Dante Moretti, truly? And what did he expect from her in return for this surreal, unasked-for salvation? The questions buzzed in her mind, unanswered, yet compelling her forward, deeper into his shadow. The pristine order of Dante's penthouse, the quiet efficiency of his staff, and Lily's daily updates from St. Jude's. All these things had woven a fragile tapestry of peace around Alara. Yet the tranquility felt precarious, like a perfectly balanced house of cards. She knew Thorne. He wasn't a man to simply let go, especially not after being outmaneuvered so definitively by Dante Moretti. The very air, even in the rarefied heights of Dante's sanctuary, seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, a lingering threat she couldn't quite pinpoint. Her hands, though now engaged in the legitimate and deeply satisfying work of conserving an ancient Egyptian papyrus scroll in her state-of-the-art studio, still carried a phantom tremor. Every unexpected ping from her phone, every shadow that flickered across the glass walls of her studio, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She found herself subconsciously bracing, waiting for the inevitable blow. It came subtle at first, insidious in its design. She was scrolling through a reputable art news aggregator, catching up on industry developments when headlines snagged her attention. Viridian auction house under scrutiny, lingering questions about provenance and staff integrity. Her breath caught. The article, written by a notoriously ruthless investigative journalist, hinted at unethical practices and misleading authentication reports during Thorne's tenure. But buried deep within the convoluted prose, a single toxic paragraph emerged, almost like a coded message for those who knew. Sources close to the ongoing investigation suggest that a former senior conservator, praised for a meteoric rise through the ranks, may have played an unwitting or complicit role in the alleged falsifications, raising concerns about her sudden disappearance from the art scene and her subsequent reemergence in less conventional circles. Alara's blood ran cold. Unwilling or complicit. The words were a poisoned arrow, designed to destroy her reputation, to cast a shadow of doubt so profound that no legitimate institution would ever touch her again. Thorne was actively discrediting her, painting her as either a naive fool or a willing participant in his schemes. He was trying to sever her ties to the world of art she cherished, to ensure that even if she escaped him, she would never truly be free. The injustice of it burned, a searing anger that quickly twisted into a familiar, suffocating fear. This wasn't just about her. It was a warning. A message to Dante. She carries my stains. She is damaged goods. She closed the browser, her fingers numb. The beautiful papyrus scroll before her, its fragile fibers whispering of forgotten millennia, suddenly seemed irrelevant. All that mattered was the looming threat, the insidious reach of Thorne's malice. She paced her studio, the smooth marble cool beneath her bare feet, her mind racing. What could she do? How could she fight a smear campaign launched by a man with deep, twisted connections? She had no resources, no platform, no voice against his venomous whispers. Just as the despair threatened to overwhelm her, Dante appeared in the doorway, a silent specter. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his powerful chest and dark trousers. His eyes, though, were anything but simple. They were keen, alert, missing nothing. He held a tablet in one hand, its screen a soft glow against the dimness of the corridor. "Something troubles you," he stated, his voice a low, even tone that offered no judgment, only observation. Alara's gaze darted to the tablet, a sudden horrifying thought striking her. Had he seen the article? Did he now view her as compromised, a liability? The thought twisted in her stomach. Thorn, she began, her voice a strained whisper. He's trying to ruin me. There's an article. Dante merely raised a hand, cutting her off. I am aware. He moved further into the studio, his presence dominating the space. He didn't sit, simply stood, a pillar of controlled power. He attempted a similar maneuver against Lily's care at St. Jude's. Anonymous calls questioning your financial solvency, hinting at unpaid debts that might compromise her access to specialist treatments. All intercepted, all neutralized before they reached the hospital administration. Alara stared at him, stunned. He had known. He had been protecting Lily, silently, efficiently, without her even realizing the danger. A wave of profound relief, mixed with a chilling awe, washed over her. He truly was the Shadow King. His protection wasn't just physical. It was an invisible shield against the insidious, bureaucratic horrors of the world. But the article, my reputation, she began, still reeling. Dante's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, a dangerous flash of teeth. Thorn confuses noise with power. He believes a few well-placed whispers can dismantle an empire. He is mistaken. He turned the tablet to face her. On the screen was not the article Alara had read. Instead, it showed a series of meticulously compiled legal documents. As of this morning, Dante stated, his voice devoid of emotion, Viridian Auction House is facing no less than 7 simultaneous independent audits from various government agencies. Accusations range from tax fraud to illicit trafficking of cultural artifacts. His assets have been frozen. His primary banking partners have severed ties. His name has been red-flagged internationally. His sources for that article are currently unavailable for comment. Some are facing their own legal challenges. Others have simply ceased to exist in any meaningful capacity. Alara's jaw dropped. It was a swift, brutal, utterly silent obliteration. There was no public spectacle, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet, relentless dismantling of Thorn's entire world, executed with surgical precision. This wasn't justice. It was a demonstration of absolute, unchallengeable power. Dante hadn't merely countered Thorn's attack. He had erased Thorn from the chessboard. He tried to make me look like a fool, Alara whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. He tried to cast a shadow on something I now own. Dante corrected, his voice hardening, his eyes flashing with an intensity that sent a shiver through her. That is a mistake he will not repeat. He looked at her then, his gaze piercing, possessive. You are under my protection, Alara. And what is mine, no one tarnishes. No one questions. And certainly, no one threatens. His words were a cold, hard promise, a declaration that left no room for doubt. Alara felt a complex swirl of emotions. Shock at the sheer scale of Dante's power, awe at his ruthless efficiency, and a profound, bone-deep fear of the man himself. But beneath it all, a strange, undeniable thread of admiration bloomed. He had protected her, irrevocably, completely. The world he inhabited was dangerous. Yes, a realm of shadows and unspoken rules, but within it, she was untouchable. He had confirmed it. She truly was in a gilded cage, and the bars were made of his formidable will. She knew now, with chilling clarity, that this was not just a new life. It was an entirely new existence. Her old life, her old problems, her old fears, Dante Moretti had incinerated them all with a quiet snap of his fingers. But what would this new existence demand of her? What was the price of such absolute protection from a man who wielded power like a silent, deadly weapon? The answer, she suspected, would slowly, inevitably, reveal itself, pulling her deeper into the enigmatic heart of the Shadow King. The quiet rhythm of life within Dante's penthouse had, against all odds, begun to feel safe. Not entirely, not absolutely, but enough for the constant, frantic thrum of fear in Alara's veins to slowly recede, replaced by a cautious, tentative calm. Lily's latest reports from St. Jude's were overwhelmingly positive, her condition stabilizing under the relentless scrutiny of specialists. The ethical art studio had become Alara's sanctuary, a place where her hands, once stained with the grime of deceit, now moved with a clean, unburdened purpose. But the silence of the vast, opulent spaces could sometimes be deafening, especially after the last brushstroke had dried and the city lights began to blur into a soft, distant glow. It was during these twilight hours, often after one of their silently shared dinners, that the impenetrable wall Dante had built around himself would occasionally, subtly shimmer. Tonight, the quiet stretched between them in the library, a room Alara had come to adore. The scent of aged paper and fine leather filled the air, a comforting anchor against the lingering unease that still clung to her. Dante sat opposite her in a high-backed armchair, a glass of amber liquid swirling in his hand, its ice cubes clinking softly. He wasn't reading, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames and the colossal fireplace, his profile sharp and unyielding against the warm glow. Alara, cradling a mug of jasmine tea, felt an unusual openness stirring within her. Thorne's complete obliteration had been a brutal, terrifying demonstration of Dante's power, yet it had also been a profound act of protection. The knowledge that no threat could truly reach her, or Lily, under his formidable shadow, had unlocked something deep inside. You know, Alara began, her voice a little softer than she intended, testing the silence. When I was younger, I used to dream of having a studio like mine, full of genuine art, where I could just breathe. She took a slow sip of tea, the floral warmth a gentle comfort. Not fighting to pay bills, not worrying if Lily would make it through the night. Just art. Dante didn't move, but she felt his attention shift, a subtle tightening in the air. And now, he rumbled, his voice low, a deep current flowing beneath the surface calm. Alara sighed, a long, weary exhalation that carried the weight of years of struggle. No, I have it. But the ghost of what I did for Thorne, it still clings. The guilt. Forcing myself to create those forgeries, knowing I was contributing to a lie. It was devastating. She looked down at her hands, still pristine from her work, yet she could almost feel the phantom grime. And the guilt over Lily. I felt like I was failing her. Every single day. That I wasn't strong enough, smart enough to protect her without compromising everything. The admission, raw and unflinching, hung in the air. It was the first time she had voiced the true depth of her shame, the gnawing self-recrimination that had been her constant companion. A tremor passed through her, a lingering echo of the helplessness she had once felt. Dante finally turned his head, his obsidian eyes piercing through the shadows, holding hers captive. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a profound, almost terrifying stillness. Survival, he stated, his voice flat, emotionless, is not failure, Alara. It is simply adaptation. Alara met his gaze, surprised by his response. But at what cost? What you become when you adapt too much. His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing under his skin. You become what is necessary. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, the ice chinking like distant bells. You think you understand compromise? You think you understand the decisions one must make to protect what is theirs? His voice had dropped, now a dangerous murmur, laced with an unspoken bitterness. A quiet curiosity, potent and compelling, tugged at Alara. She sensed a hidden wound, a deep-seated pain beneath his formidable exterior. Tell me, she urged softly, surprising herself with her boldness. Tell me about your costs, about what you became. Dante's gaze drifted back to the fire, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes like tiny, captive stars. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of the logs. It felt like an eternity, a battle within him between revelation and iron control. I had a brother, he finally said, his voice the low, gravelly whisper that seemed to echo with the ghosts of the past. It was so unexpected, so stark, that Alara froze, her tea mug halfway to her lips. Marco. My cousin, you know him. He paused. My actual brother, Alessio, he was different. Reckless. Full of fire. He believed in loyalty above all else. A fatal flaw in our world. Ilera listened, completely captivated, sensing the immense burden of his words. My father, Dante continued, his voice now devoid of any warmth, was a man of his time. He built an empire. Not with art, but with blood and fear. He believed in absolute control. And he believed that any weakness, any crack in the facade, would be exploited. He took another slow sip. Alessio, he was that crack. He questioned the methods. He believed in mercy, a luxury we could not afford. A cold knot formed in Ilera's stomach. She knew instinctively where this was going. The cost of power. The cost of loyalty. There was a rival, Dante said, his gaze still fixed on the fire, as if seeing a scene from the past playing out in the flames. A betrayal from within our own ranks. Alessio, he tried to be the peacemaker. He believed he could negotiate reason with them. He refused to see the malice, the ambition beneath the smiles. His hand, holding the glass, tightened, the knuckles whitening. He went alone to talk. Ilera felt a wave of profound sadness for the lost brother, a man she had never known, whose fate was clearly etched in Dante's grim expression. And she prompted gently, her voice barely a whisper. Dante finally looked at her, his eyes raw, haunted by a desolate loneliness that shocked her. He returned in pieces. Literally. A message. From the rival. And from my own father. A lesson. About weakness. About the cost of defying the family. Or showing mercy. The revelation was a punch to Ilera's gut. The sheer brutality, the cold calculation of it, was horrifying. But more than that, she saw the profound, gaping wound it had left on Dante. The Shadow King, invincible and terrifying, was also a man who had experienced a devastating personal loss, a betrayal that had fractured his soul and forged him into the unyielding force he was today. I was too slow, Dante continued, his voice now a low growl, laced with a potent mix of regret and self-loathing. Too young, too trusting. I should have protected him. I failed. And my father, he ensured I never forgot the price of that failure. Or the loneliness that comes with absolute power. You cannot trust Ilera. Not truly. Not when you stand where I stand. Because everyone, eventually, will try to take something from you. Ilera's heart ached for him, a strange, unexpected pang of empathy for the dangerous man who had saved her. He had endured a different kind of pain, a different kind of compromise, but the burden of it was equally heavy. They both carried the scars of betrayal and the desperate fight to protect those they loved or had loved. Without thinking, driven by a sudden, overwhelming urge to offer solace, Ilera reached out. Her hand, hesitant at first, found his on the armrest of his chair. Her fingers, soft and warm, covered the back of his hand, a stark contrast to his cool, firm skin. It was a simple, non-physical touch, yet it was loaded with a profound intimacy, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. Dante flinched, a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor, as if the unexpected contact was a jolt to his carefully constructed defenses. His head snapped towards her, his eyes wide with surprise, then narrowed with an unreadable intensity. For a moment, she feared she had overstepped, crossed an invisible line. But then, slowly, his fingers relaxed under hers. He didn't pull away. Instead, his gaze softened, just a fraction, a barely discernible crack in his obsidian armor. He looked at her, truly at her, and in his eyes, Ilera saw not the ruthless Shadow King, but a man burdened by immense sorrow, clinging to a desolate solitude he had carved out for himself. And in that silent, shared moment, a fragile, new kind of trust bloomed between them, a silent promise to shoulder, if only for a fleeting instant, the unspoken burdens of each other's past. The fragile peace of the library settled around them once more, but now it was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the nascent stirrings of a connection, an understanding forged in the crucible of shared pain. Alara felt a peculiar shift, the sense that she was not merely a possession, but something more. Something he guarded not just with his power, but with a burgeoning, unspoken emotion. The faint chiming of a clock from the hallway, marking the passing hour, broke the spell. Dante's hand shifted under hers, a subtle flexing of muscles, reminding her of the coiled power always present beneath the surface. He finally pulled his hand away, his gaze still intense, but the vulnerability receding, replaced by a renewed guard. He had let her in, just a little, but the fortress remained. The past, Dante said, his voice now back to its usual controlled rumble, is a dangerous place to linger, Alara, especially for those who seek to exploit old wounds. He rose then, his powerful frame casting a long shadow across the room. Be vigilant. The world I inhabit, it remembers every weakness. Alara watched him leave, his words a chilling reminder of the ever-present danger. He had shared a piece of himself, revealed a vulnerability, but also implicitly warned her of the consequences. She was no longer just a conservator, or a protected ward. She was someone who knew his secrets, someone connected to his pain. And that she instinctively knew made her a new kind of target in his dangerous, shadow-drenched world, one that would soon test the very limits of his formidable protection. The fragile peace that had settled over Alara's life within Dante's gilded cage was shattered by an urgent, almost desperate plea from Lily. A new art therapy program at St. Jude's had opened a slot, offering unique techniques that promised to aid in her physical and emotional recovery. Lily, ever the optimistic spirit, had begged Alara to retrieve a small, antique music box from their old apartment, a cherished relic from their childhood, believed to bring good luck. It was a tangible link to a past Alara had fiercely tried to protect, and an innocent request she couldn't refuse. Despite Dante's unspoken warnings, despite the subtle unease that still lingered in the periphery of her senses, Alara convinced herself it would be safe. His security detail, always discreet but ever present, would be with her. The apartment, now empty and sterile, was far from the high-stakes world of art forgery and Mafia power plays. It was just a music box, a simple token of sisterly love. The black sedan, familiar now in its silent efficiency, dropped Alara and two of Dante's men as silent, watchful shadows themselves, outside her old apartment building. The air was colder here, tinged with the familiar, gritty scent of exhaust fumes and forgotten dreams. The alleyway, perpetually damp, still smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals from the dry cleaner below. For a moment, a wave of nostalgia, sharp and bittersweet, washed over her. Stay close. The larger of the two guards, a man named Victor whose eyes missed nothing, rumbled in his deep baritone. His hand rested subtly on the hilt of a concealed weapon. I'll be quick, Alara promised, clutching her small handbag, its contents a simple set of keys to a life that no longer existed. The apartment was eerily quiet, stripped bare of furniture, echoing with the ghosts of laughter and whispered secrets. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak afternoon light filtering through the grimy windows. The music box was exactly where she'd left it, tucked away in the back of a built-in closet, its tiny, ornate surface a vibrant splash of color against the drab interior. She wrapped it carefully in a piece of an old silk scarf, a soft comfort for Lily. Just as she turned to leave, a muffled thud from the hallway sent a jolt of ice through her veins. Victor's earlier warning flashed in her mind. Her breath caught. No, it can't be. She peered cautiously through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Too empty. A sickening premonition twisted in her gut. She yanked the door open, her heart hammering against her ribs. Victor and his partner were gone. The hallway was pristine, no sign of struggle, no bodies. But a faint, sweet, cloying scent, like overblown lilies, hung in the air. A scent she hadn't detected when she first arrived. Chloroform. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up her throat. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy with terror, desperate to call Dante. But before she could even unlock the screen, a large, calloused hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her scream. Another arm, strong and inescapable, wrapped around her waist, pulling her back into the apartment. The music box clattered to the floor, its delicate mechanism jarring, releasing a faint, tinny melody, a haunting, off-key waltz that echoed grotesquely in the sudden silence. A voice, low and guttural, rasped in her ear. "The Shadow King's pet, I presume. He'll pay a fortune for you." Alara struggled, a primal, frantic thrashing against her captor, but his grip was iron. A heavy, chemical-soaked cloth was pressed over her nose and mouth. The cloying sweetness of the chloroform filled her lungs, burning, dizzying. Her vision blurred, the room spinning, the sound of the tinny waltz growing fainter, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. She fought, she clawed, she desperately tried to scream Dante's name, but the world tilted, then dissolved into a suffocating black void. Dante Moretti felt it the moment his private line, the one reserved only for his innermost security detail, rang with a specific, coded triple bus. It was a breach, a catastrophic failure. His heart, usually a cold, steady drum, lurched with a sudden, agonizing jolt. The air in his opulent office, usually so still and controlled, suddenly felt thin, impossible to breathe. He snatched the phone. "Report." His voice was a low growl, barely controlled fury. "Mr. Moretti?" The voice on the other end, strained and apologetic, was that of his chief of security, Marco, a man who rarely showed emotion. "Victor and Stavros, they went silent 10 minutes ago, outside Ms. Vance's old apartment. No distress signal. Nothing. Just the gone." A black wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over Dante. Alara. His Alara. Alone. Vulnerable. He had been so sure she was safe, so confident in his perimeter, his men. He had underestimated the desperation of his enemies, the depth of their depravity. Thorn, or someone even more dangerous, had dared to touch his. Rage, primal and incandescent, ignited within him. It was a beast long dormant, now unleashed with a terrifying ferocity. He slammed his fist onto his polished mahogany desk, the wood groaning under the impact. The delicate porcelain teacup, forgotten, toppled, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Trace every single piece of footage. Every camera, every satellite, every traffic light within a 5-mile radius. Dante roared, his voice raw, stripped of its usual calm. He was on his feet, pacing like a caged beast, his mind racing, calculating, strategizing. "I want to know who. I want to know where. And if they so much as look at her wrong." He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling promise of unimaginable violence. A cold, agonizing fear twisted in his gut. A fear he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Alessio. A fear of powerlessness. For a fleeting, horrifying second, he felt it, the dizzying sensation of losing control, of knowing someone he fiercely protected was in mortal danger, and he couldn't immediately reach her. It was his black moment, the abyss of uncertainty, and it nearly consumed him. "And Lily," Dante demanded, his voice tight, hoarse. "Is St. Jude secure? Perimeter reinforced, sir. No threats detected near the hospital." This was specifically targeted at Ms. Vance. Targeted. The word burned in Dante's mind. They hadn't just kidnapped her. They had taken her, a deliberate act of defiance, a direct challenge to him, the Shadow King. He saw it all with brutal clarity. Thorn, desperate and vengeful, had allied with someone even darker, someone who knew his methods, knew his vulnerabilities. Alara, his quiet conservator, his delicate flower, had become the ultimate leverage. He stopped pacing, his eyes, usually so cold and controlled, now burning with a dangerous, feral light. The fear, the momentary powerlessness, solidified into a resolve colder and harder than steel. They had made a grave mistake. They had dared to touch what was his. "Find her," Dante commanded, his voice now a dangerous whisper, low and deadly. "Tear this city apart if you have to. But bring her back to me, unharmed." His face, usually a mask of calm, was contorted with a silent, terrifying rage. "And then, I will make them regret the day they were born. His empire, his vast network, his limitless resources, all will be unleashed. The city, which he subtly commanded from the shadows, would now become a hunting ground. The serpent had coiled, striking at his heart. But the Shadow King, once roused, was a force of nature, a predator whose fury knew no bounds. And they were about to learn, with brutal finality, what happens when you steal from a man who owns the darkness. The penthouse, usually a bastion of cool, restrained luxury, had transformed into a pulsating nerve center of controlled chaos. Dante stood in his private command room, a space usually reserved for strategic planning and the quiet management of his legitimate empire. Now it vibrated with a raw, primal energy. Screens plastered across one wall displayed a dizzying mosaic of city feeds, traffic cameras, satellite imagery, discreet surveillance from his own network. The air thrummed with the low murmur of urgent voices, the rapid-fire click of keyboards, and the metallic tang of fear and adrenaline. His face was a mask of cold fury, etched deeper than Alara had ever seen. His eyes, usually obsidian pools of calm calculation, burned with an infernal light, reflecting the frantic data flashing across the screens. He was no longer just Dante Moretti, the enigmatic collector. He was the Shadow King unleashed, a predator whose prey had been stolen, and whose wrath was absolute. Every intersection, every alley, every abandoned warehouse within a 20-mile radius, Dante's voice, a low, dangerous growl, cut through the din filter for any unscheduled movements, any vehicle that deviates from regular patterns, any signal, no matter how faint, from her last known location. His fingers, usually so precise, clenched into tight fists, the knuckles white against his dark skin. He felt it, the phantom ache in his chest, the burning need to reclaim what was his, what he had sworn to protect. He had failed once, with Alessio. He would not fail again. Not with Alara. Alara awoke to a throbbing headache and the acrid smell of damp concrete and rust. Her mouth felt dry, tasting of ash. Her eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus in the oppressive gloom. She was lying on a cold, unforgiving floor. Her wrists were bound tightly with coarse rope, digging painfully into her skin, and a gag, thick and rough, chafed against her lips, making breathing a shallow, painful effort. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized her. She thrashed, a frantic, desperate struggle against her bonds, but was useless. The ropes were too tight, the floor too hard. She was in a warehouse. Dim light filtered through grimy, high-set windows, revealing towering stacks of empty crates, draped in cobwebs. The air was thick with the chill of neglect, the metallic tang of decay. She could hear the rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the distance, a mocking counterpoint to her pounding heart. Two figures emerged from the deeper shadows, their silhouettes hulking and indistinct. One of them, a gaunt man with a cruel smile, squatted down before her, his breath foul. Well, well, well. The king's pet. Looks like we finally got your attention, Moretti. He laughed, harsh, grating sound that scraped against her raw nerves. He'll pay handsomely for you, little conservator. A real shame, too. Such pretty eyes. His words were like acid, burning through her terror, leaving behind a cold, desolate despair. She was leverage, a pawn in a game far beyond her control. Thorne's known associates, any new partnerships, any unusual activity on his dormant accounts. Dante barked, his eyes narrowed, scanning a rapidly compiling data stream. He's desperate. He wouldn't risk this alone. A younger operative, his face pale with concentration, suddenly pointed at a screen. Sir. A burner phone activated for precisely 30 seconds, then powered down. Located in an industrial district, Old Ferry Terminal sector. The signal overlapped with a known vehicle, registered to a shell company, linked to Thorne's dissolved network. Dante's eyes sharpened. The coal pier. He'd hide her there. Overgrown, forgotten. His mind, a cold, calculating machine, already pieced together the puzzle. And someone else. Someone with enough influence to bypass his initial perimeter. The anger surged, pure and potent. Mobilized Team Alpha and Beta. 2 squads. Perimeter. Infiltration. No casualties on our side. Minimal on theirs. But no one touches Alara. Understand. His voice was a whip crack, leaving no room for argument. I lead the primary assault. His security chief, Marco, a seasoned veteran, stepped forward, his expression grim. Dante, it's too risky. Let me lead the advance. You're too valuable. Dante's gaze, lethal and unwavering, pinned Marco. She is mine, Marco. No one else will reclaim her. The possessiveness in his tone was absolute, chilling. Prepare the car. Now. The coal pier was a skeletal husk of rusted steel and crumbling concrete, shrouded in the oppressive pre-dawn darkness. The wind off the river carried the biting chill of the water, the metallic tang of brine and decay. Dante moved like a shadow, his dark tactical gear blending seamlessly with the gloom, his footsteps silent on the uneven ground. His elite team, ghosts themselves, fanned out behind him, each man a precisely honed instrument of controlled violence. His heart thundered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety and rage. He could feel her presence, a faint, almost psychic pull, drawing him deeper into the labyrinthine shadows of the abandoned structures. Every broken window, every creaking sound, every gust of wind felt like a direct assault on his senses, fueling his murderous intent. He found the warehouse, a vast cavernous space that loomed like a gaping maw in the darkness. A faint, flickering light emanated from within, a beacon of perverse hope. Team Alpha, secure perimeter. Beta, secondary entry point. Move silent. Move fast. His orders were clipped, precise, his voice a low growl into his comms. He approached the main entrance, a massive, rusted, rolling door. His hand, encased in a combat glove, flexed on the grip of his silenced pistol. The scent of chloroform, faint but unmistakable, wafted from within, sending a fresh wave of ice and fury through him. He burst through the door, a dark, unstoppable blur. The flickering light from a single bare bulb revealed a scene that sent a fresh wave of primal rage through him. Alara, bound, gagged, her face pale with terror, struggling against her captors. There were 4 of them, hulking brutes, their faces contorted with leering satisfaction. And standing a few feet away, a smug, triumphant sneer plastered across his face, was Sterling Thorne. Well, Moretti, Thorne drawled, a cheap cigar clutched between his fingers, its acrid smoke fouling the air. Glad you could make it. The art world's greatest collector, finally showing some personal interest. Dante didn't speak. He raised his pistol, its silenced muzzle an ominous, unblinking eye. One of Thorne's men, a beefy brute with a knife, lunged at Alara, a vile threat in his eyes. Dante fired. A soft whip. The brute crumpled, a neat hole blooming in his forehead. He fell without a sound, a dead weight against a stack of crates. Chaos erupted. Thorne's remaining men, momentarily stunned, reacted, their own weapons drawn. But Dante was already moving, a whirlwind of lethal efficiency. He didn't just fight, he eliminated. His movements were fluid, precise, each strike delivered with bone-shattering force. The second man, attempting to raise a shotgun, found his arm twisted, snapped, before Dante's elbow struck his temple, rendering him unconscious. You touch her, Dante growled, his voice a low, guttural snarl that was more animal than human, and I will tear you apart, piece by agonizing piece. Thorne, pale with fear, fumbled for a small, ornate pistol in his coat. Stay back, Moretti. I'll kill her. I swear. He made a desperate lunge towards Alara, grabbing her arm, pulling her roughly to her feet, his pistol pressed against her temple. Alara's eyes, wide with terror, locked onto Dante's. She saw the raw, untamed fury in their depths, a desperate desperation that mirrored her own. She was terrified for herself, but a new, startling fear for him surged through her. He was risking everything. Let her go, Thorne, Dante said, his voice deadly calm, a chilling contrast to the blazing inferno in his eyes. "You're out of your depth. I'll destroy her. I'll destroy everything you claim," Thorn shrieked, pressing the gun harder against Alara's temple. Just then, a third of Thorn's men, the one Dante had merely incapacitated, stirred, groaning, reaching for his discarded knife. Dante, his attention split, saw the movement. A flicker of distraction, a second hesitation. Thorn seized the opportunity, shoving Alara hard, using her as a shield to create distance, then turning his pistol on Dante. Dante reacted instantly, diving, a spray of bullets tearing into the crates where he had just stood. A searing pain exploded in his left shoulder as a ricochet shard, or perhaps a glancing blow from one of Thorn's wild shots, bit deep. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the burning agony, the sudden gush of warmth. It was nothing. Alara. He rolled, coming up in a crouch, his eyes already tracking Thorn, who was dragging Alara, stumbling, toward a hidden exit. The thought of losing her, of her being hurt, was a cold, pure agony that eclipsed any physical pain. His rage intensified, becoming a focused, unstoppable weapon. As Thorn wrestled Alara towards the exit, his last remaining guard, a burly figure, stepped into Dante's path, a glinting machete in his hand. Dante didn't hesitate. He moved with the savage grace of a beast, disarming the man with a brutal, swift move, then silencing him with a single, precise strike that snapped bone. Thorn, now at the crumbling edge of the pier, pushed Alara violently, sending her stumbling towards the dark, churning waters below. "You can have her, Moretti." "In pieces," he screamed, his face contorted in a final desperate act of spite, before raising his pistol to fire at Alara. Time seemed to slow. Alara cried out, her voice a muffled sob behind the gag as she teetered on a precipice, the cold spray of the river already chilling her face. The vast, black expanse of the water beckoned, terrifying and inevitable, but Dante was faster. Faster than fear, faster than thought. His injured shoulder screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He lunged, a desperate, raw surge of power. He tackled Thorn, his body slamming into the older man with brutal force, sending them both tumbling away from the edge. Thorn's pistol skittered across the concrete, its desperate shot harmlessly lost in the night. Dante wasted no time. He was on Thorn, a dark, furious angel of vengeance, his powerful hands closing around the other man's throat. Thorn thrashed, clawed, but Dante's grip was unyielding, fueled by a terrifying, all-consuming possessiveness. He was avenging every moment of Alara's fear, every tear she had shed, every lie she had been forced to tell. Meanwhile, Alara, trembling, had regained her footing, staring in wide-eyed horror and awe at the raw, brutal spectacle before her. The Shadow King, a force of nature unleashed, fighting for her. Dante finally released Thorn, tossing him aside like a broken doll. Thorn lay there, gasping, wheezing, broken. Dante ignored him. His eyes, blazing with an almost terrifying intensity, found Alara. He crossed the distance between them in 3 powerful strides, his breath ragged, his shoulder bleeding. He reached her, his hands large and warm, cupping her face, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that streamed down her cheeks. He tore off her gag with a single swift motion, his touch surprisingly gentle amidst the chaos. "Alara," he rasped, his voice thick with raw emotion, relief, and a terrifying possessiveness. "Mine." The word was a claim, a vow, a declaration of ownership that resonated deep within her soul. He pulled her against his chest, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, but it was a sweet suffocation, a primal claim that promised absolute safety within his dangerous embrace. His scent of leather, blood, and something uniquely Dante filled her senses, overwhelming the lingering stench of fear and decay. She clung to him, trembling, burying her face against his strong beating heart, finally safe within the terrifying fury of the king. The journey back to the penthouse was a blur of muted sounds and overwhelming sensations for Alara. Dante's arms, strong and unwavering despite the blood seeping from his shoulder, held her tightly against him in the back of another silent armored car. The scent of his blood, coppery and warm, mingled with the faint metallic tang of fear still clinging to her, but beneath it all was the raw, comforting smell of him. She was shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins like poison, leaving her weak and utterly drained. He had held her head against his chest, murmuring low, indistinct words she couldn't quite decipher but understood instinctively were meant to soothe. His presence was a solid anchor in the storm that raged inside her. The sheer, terrifying brutality of what she had witnessed, the ease with which Dante had moved through violence, the cold, lethal precision of his actions, had carved a new, complex understanding of him into her soul. He was a king, yes, but a king forged in shadows and tempered by fire. Back in the penthouse, the quiet efficiency of Dante's medical team was almost jarring after the raw chaos of the pier. They moved with practiced grace, swiftly and silently attending to Dante's shoulder wound. Alara watched, still trembling, as they cleaned and bandaged the gash, her heart twisting with a strange mixture of guilt and gratitude. He had been hurt because of her. Her own injuries were minor, rope burns on her wrists, a bruised cheek from where Thorn had roughly pushed her, and the throat raw from the gag. But the deeper wounds were invisible, etched into her very being, the memory of the cold floor, the leering faces, the terrifying proximity of the churning black water. She felt exposed, vulnerable, forever altered. Dante, once his shoulder was neatly bandaged, dismissed his men with a curt nod. His eyes, still blazing with a potent mix of fury and fierce relief, immediately sought Alaris. He reached for her, his uninjured hand cupping her jaw, his thumb gently stroking her skin. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, raspy, edged with an intensity that sent a fresh shiver through her. It wasn't a question, but a desperate need for confirmation. Alara leaned into his touch, finding solace in its unwavering solidity. "Ah, I think so," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. The terror still clawed at the edges of her mind, a shadow she knew would linger. But Thorn. Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing under his skin. "Thorn is no longer a concern." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet the chilling finality of it spoke volumes. "Nor are his associates. They have ceased to be a threat." Alara shuddered, a vivid image of Dante's brutal efficiency flashing in her mind. She understood the unspoken implication. Thorn and his men hadn't just been neutralized. They had been eradicated. Not with legal proceedings, but with the cold, absolute justice of the Shadow King. There was no room for doubt, no possibility of future retaliation. This was a permanent solution, etched in fear and blood. The next few days were a strange blend of physical recovery and silent reckoning. Alara spent hours in her studio, unable to focus on art, instead replaying the moments of terror, the sound of the music box, the feel of the cold concrete. But interspersed with those haunting images were the indelible imprints of Dante's fury, his unwavering protection. Meanwhile, the city, seemingly oblivious to the violent undercurrents beneath its polished surface, began to hum with a different kind of news. Not an official report, but the relentless, insidious whispers of the underworld. News traveled fast in Dante's circles, amplified by calculated leaks and undeniable displays of power. Thorn's assets, already frozen, vanished. His shell companies were dissolved, his networks dismantled with surgical precision. Key figures in his illicit operations disappeared, their names erased from the city's ledger. There were no bodies for the police to find, no concrete evidence of a bloody purge. Only the profound, terrifying silence that followed an eradication. It was a public, terrifying display of Dante's reach, his absolute dominion. He wasn't merely delivering justice, he was issuing a chilling, undeniable warning to anyone who dared to challenge him or to touch what was his. He ensured that the consequences of harming Alara were not just severe, but absolute and exemplary. Alara heard snippets of it from the various staff members, whispered in hushed tones, their faces pale with a mixture of fear and awe. The entire underworld was abuzz. The Shadow King had moved, swiftly and brutally, to protect his own. And the message was clear. Dante Moretti's claims were absolute, his vengeance terrifying, and his protection, once granted, was impenetrable. She sat by the towering windows of the penthouse, looking out at the glittering cityscape, feeling the immense weight of that knowledge. A chill settled in her bones, not of fear for herself, but a profound awe mixed with a disquieting recognition of the man who had become her protector. She understood, with a clarity that both frightened and strangely comforted her, that this ruthlessness, this capacity for brutal retribution, was inextricably linked to his ability to keep her and Lily safe. It was the other side of his coin, the darkness that guaranteed her light. One afternoon, Dante found her in her studio, staring blankly at a blank canvas. He walked towards her, his footsteps silent on the polished floor, his presence a heavy, undeniable force. He didn't speak, simply stood behind her, his gaze following hers to the empty canvas. "It frightens me," Alara finally admitted, her voice low, fragile. "What you did. How easily you erased them. The ruthlessness." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his, seeking an answer to the complex emotions churning within her. Does it ever stop? The violence? The darkness? Dante's hand, the one with the freshly bandaged shoulder, reached out, his fingers gently tracing the curve of her jaw. His touch was warm, firm, utterly possessive. "No," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Not in my world. But that darkness, Alara, it is also the shield that protects what is truly precious." His gaze deepened, intense and unwavering. "What I did for you. For Lily. To ensure that no one ever dares to threaten what belongs to me again." He watched her, allowing her to absorb his words, to look into the depths of his soul and see the raw, uncompromising truth. There was no apology in his eyes, no softening of his resolve, only absolute certainty. Alara searched his gaze, seeing the echoes of his past, the pain of Alessio, the loneliness of his power. And she understood. This wasn't just about control. It was about an unyielding commitment, a fierce primal devotion to those he claimed. His ruthlessness was a terrifying extension of his protection. She might fear his methods, but she could not deny the profound, bone-deep safety they afforded her. A slow, steady breath escaped her. The trauma was real, a scar that would forever mark her. But so was the overwhelming relief, the profound gratitude, and the dawning understanding that she was, truly, irrevocably, under the protection of a man who would burn the world to keep her safe. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of his brutal, effective justice, Alara felt a profound sense of reclamation. Her life, once fractured and threatened, was now inextricably bound to his, a masterpiece remade, claimed by the Shadow King. She was no longer just an endangered conservator. She was his. And with that understanding came a new, terrifying, yet intoxicating freedom. Sometimes we carry the invisible scars of compromise, believing our past mistakes define our worth. Alara, forced to tame her art for survival, thought her soul was irrevocably stained. But in the ruthless, possessive gaze of Dante Moretti, the Shadow King, she found a truth far more profound. That true value isn't found in flawlessness, but in being seen, claimed, and fiercely protected for who you are, faults and all. His dark love didn't erase her past. It made her untouchable, proving that even in the deepest shadows, a fierce belonging can bloom. If this story resonated with your own journey of healing and finding your place, let us know. Join our community by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And in the comments below, share your own affirmation, "I am seen," or "I am worthy." Together, we'll continue to explore the power of love that defies expectations and transforms pain into an unbreakable strength.